Eliot had grown used to the teasing. Growing up looking more feminine than most boys in their small town wasn't exactly a recipe for an easy life. His delicate features, slender frame, and the way his voice carried a soft, melodic tone had made him an easy target for bullies. But no one had been as relentless as Eli. Elye Mercer, the spoiled rich kid who thought the world revolved around him, had been the bane of Eliot's existence since kindergarten. From tugging at his hair and calling him princess to spreading stupid rumors that made the other kids laugh at Eliot's expense, Elye had always found a way to make himself Eliot's personal tormentor. But years had passed, and things were supposed to be different now. College was a fresh start, or so Eliot had thought. When Eliot found out he'd been assigned to share a dorm room with someone named Elye Mercer, he'd frozen. Surely it wasn't the same Elye. What were the chances? But as he stepped into the dorm room that first day and saw the familiar smirk on Elye's handsome, arrogant face, all his hopes were dashed. Elye had taken one look at him, his big eyes, soft features, and slender build, and raised an eyebrow. "Aren't dorms supposed to be co-ed now?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They must have made a mistake putting me with a girl." Eliot flushed, gripping the strap of his bag tighter. "I'm not a girl," he said quietly, though his words sounded more like a sigh. Elye blinked, taken aback for just a moment, before he quickly covered it with a laugh. "Oh, my bad," he said, shrugging it off as if it didn't matter. "Guess some things never change, huh?" It stung more than Eliot wanted to admit. He'd always been Elye's favorite target, but being stuck in a dorm with him, this was going to be hell. Days turned into weeks, and surprisingly, Elye wasn't as awful as Eliot remembered. Sure, he was still arrogant and liked to push Eliot's buttons, but he wasn't cruel anymore. Maybe it was the distance from high school, or maybe Elye had grown up a little. Elye, on the other hand, found himself watching Eliot more often than he wanted to admit. At first, it was just curiosity. Eliot was quiet and kept to himself, spending most of his time reading or sketching in his notebook. But there was something about him that Elye couldn't shake, something that made him pay attention to the way Eliot tucked his hair behind his ear, or the soft smile he gave when he thought no one was looking. One evening, Elye came back to the dorm to find Eliot curled up on the couch with his sketchbook. The light from the desk lamp cast a warm glow over his face, highlighting his soft features and the gentle curve of his lips. For the first time, Elye found himself speechless. "What are you drawing?" Elye asked, breaking the silence. Eliot looked up, startled. He quickly closed the sketchbook and set it aside. "Nothing important," he said, avoiding Elye's gaze. Elye frowned. "Come on, let me see," he said, stepping closer. "It's personal," Eliot insisted, his voice firm. Elye raised an eyebrow but backed off, sitting on the arm of the couch instead. "You've always been weirdly secretive," he said, though there was no malice in his tone. "And you've always been annoying," Eliot shot back before he could stop himself. Elye laughed, a genuine, warm sound that caught Eliot off guard. "Fair enough," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But, you're not as bad as I remember." Eliot glanced at him, his cheeks flushing. "Thanks, I guess." There was a pause, a silence that felt different from all the others they'd shared. Ellie's gaze softened as he looked at Eliot, and for a moment, the rich, spoiled boy he used to be seemed like a distant memory. Ellie said quietly, "I always thought you were different. Not in a bad way, just different." Eliot's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what Elye meant, but the way he said it, like it was something precious, made his chest feel tight. "I guess I never really gave you a chance," Elye admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I was scared, or maybe I was just an idiot." Eliot blinked, his lips parting slightly. Was this an apology from Elye Mercer? "Why are you telling me this now?" Eliot asked, his voice shaky. Eli looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Because I think I owe it to you, and because I don't want you to think I'm that guy anymore." Eliot didn't know what to say. For so long he'd hated Eli for the way he'd treated him. But now, sitting here, watching Eli's walls come down, he realized something had shifted between them. Eliot sat in stunned silence, his mind racing as he processed Eli's words. Elye Mercer, the boy who had made his life miserable for years, was now sitting here, admitting he'd been wrong. More than that, he was showing a side of himself Eliot had never seen before. Soft, vulnerable, and maybe even kind. "I don't know what to say," Eliot finally murmured, his voice barely audible. Elye leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he ran a hand through his messy hair. "You don't have to say anything. I wanted you to know. I'm not proud of the way I treated you, Eliot. I was a stupid kid with too much money and too little sense." He glanced at Eliot, his dark eyes filled with something Eliot couldn't quite place. Regret? Hope? "But I've grown up, or at least I'm trying to." Eliot's chest tightened. He wanted to believe a lie. He wanted to believe this wasn't just some elaborate game or a moment of fleeting guilt. But after years of teasing and humiliation, trust didn't come easy. "You really hurt me, Eli," Eliot said, his voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what it was like? Always feeling like I didn't belong? Always feeling like I was less because of you?" Eli's face fell, and for the first time, Eliot saw genuine shame in his expression. "I know," Eli said quietly. "And I'm sorry. I can't take back what I did, but I swear I'm not that person anymore. I want to be better. I want to, I don't know, make things right between us." Eliot searched Eli's face, looking for any sign of insincerity. But all he saw was honesty. Tentatively, Eliot let out a soft sigh. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not saying I forgive you. Not yet. But maybe we can start over." A small smile tugged at Ellie's lips. "I'll take that," he said. The room fell into a comfortable silence, and for the first time in years, Eliot felt something other than anger toward Eli. He wasn't sure what it was yet. Curiosity, acceptance, maybe even the faintest spark of something warmer. But it was there, lingering in the quiet between them. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between Eli and Eliot. They started talking more, real conversations, not the shallow banter Eliot had expected from Eli. Eli would ask about Eliot's classes, his sketches, his favorite books, and for once, it didn't feel like teasing. It felt like genuine interest. Eliot found himself letting his guard down little by little. He started to see Elye not as the spoiled rich kid he'd grown up hating, but as someone human, someone who was trying. And, slowly but surely, Eliot's resentment began to fade. One evening, after a particularly long day, Eli came back to the dorm with takeout. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting a bag of Eliot's favorite Thai food on the table. Eliot looked up from his sketchbook, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." Elye shrugged, leaning casually against the counter. "I wanted to." Eliot's cheeks flushed as he stood to grab the food. "Thanks," he said softly. They sat together at the small table in their dorm, eating in comfortable silence. But Eliot couldn't help noticing the way Eli's gaze lingered on him when he thought Eliot wasn't looking. "What?" Eliot finally asked, setting down his fork. Elye blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean, what?" "You're staring," Eliot said, his voice tinged with both curiosity and suspicion. Elye hesitated for a moment, before letting out a soft chuckle. "Can't help it, I guess," he said, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "You're different now. Not in a bad way, just different." Eliot raised an eyebrow, his heart skipping a beat. "Different how?" Eli leaned back in his chair, his smirk fading into something softer. "You're confident, strong, and beautiful," he admitted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Eliot's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure how to respond, his mind racing as he tried to process Eli's words. But before he could say anything, Eli stood, grabbing their empty takeout containers. "Anyway," Eli said, his tone lighter now, "I'm glad we're not at each other's throats anymore. It's nice." Eliot watched him, his heart pounding as Eli moved around the room. He didn't know what was happening between them, but one thing was certain. Elye Mercer was no longer the boy he used to hate. That night, as Eliot lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, Eli's words replaying in his mind. Beautiful, confident, strong. He wasn't sure what to make of it. The boy who had tormented him all those years had just called him beautiful. He turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around himself, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eli's soft gaze, the way his voice had dropped when he said the word beautiful. It felt genuine, raw, and unguarded, in a way Eli had never been before. The next morning, Eliot woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the shower running. He shuffled out of bed, rubbing his eyes, and saw a cup of coffee sitting on the counter with a note beside it. "Thought you could use this. Early class, right?" Eliot stared at the note, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had done something so thoughtful for him. Later that day, as they crossed paths in the dorm between classes, Eliot decided to test the waters. "Thanks for the coffee," he said casually, leaning against the doorframe as Eli rifled through his desk. Eli glanced up, a grin tugging at his lips. "Didn't want you falling asleep in class. You're welcome." Eliot hesitated, then added, "You're different now, you know." Eli froze for a moment, then turned to face him fully. "Different how?" he asked, echoing Eliot's question from the night before. Eliot smirked, crossing his arms. "You're thoughtful, kind, and maybe not as annoying as I remember." Eli laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I'll take that as a compliment." The days turned into weeks, and the awkwardness that had once lingered between them slowly gave way to something more comfortable. Ellie started inviting Eliot to join him for lunch or to study together in the library. He even sat through one of Eliot's favorite movies, a slow, emotional indie film Eli would have never watched on his own, and didn't complain once. One Friday night, Eli suggested they order pizza and hang out in the dorm instead of going to a party some friends had invited him to. "Not really my scene anymore," Eli had said with a shrug, though Eliot had a sneaking suspicion he just didn't want to leave him alone. As they sat on the couch, half watching a movie and sharing a pizza, the air between them shifted. Eli's arm rested casually along the back of the couch, his fingers just brushing Eliot's shoulder. Eliot could feel his presence, warm and steady, and it made his heart race. At one point, Ellie turned to him, his expression unusually serious. "Can I ask you something?" Eliot nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Why didn't you ever stand up for yourself? Back in school, I mean," Ellie asked softly. You are so much stronger than I gave you credit for." Eliot blinked, caught off guard. "I guess I didn't think it would matter," he admitted. "You were so loud, so sure of yourself. I didn't think anything I said would change how you or anyone else saw me." Elye frowned, guilt flashing across his face. "I was a jerk," he said, his voice low. "I thought it was